All right, we're in 2 Chronicles, chapter number 2. And, we saw last week, the beginning of Solomon's reign as king, and then, God asked him, what do you want me to give you? Could you imagine God asking you, what do you want me to give you? It's just like I said last week, what would we say? Would we look at things spiritually before we answered, or would we just say, hey, give me plenty of money? But I hope we would look at it spiritually and desire that, hey, God, just help me to be what you want me to be. And just like God did with Solomon, he gave Solomon the wisdom that he was asking for. That pleased God, because he could have said money, long life, whatever, and that's what God said. God said, you didn't ask for that, but I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you anyway. That's the kind of God we serve. A lot of times we sell God short. And it's sad. I heard a preacher here a night or two ago. I've been listening to a lot of different preachers on TV. For some reason or another, I've got a new channel, and it's another Christian channel. And there's a few different preachers on it, and I'm listening to them. And I kind of like some of the things they're saying. And one thing they were talking about was, similar to this right here. Just trusting God with everything, no matter what. Because it's just like I keep seeing this thing on Facebook, and I don't want. Facebook can be good, but it can be bad too. But Facebook, I keep seeing this thing on there that says, when somebody talks about the poorest person in the world, it's not the one with the least money. It's the one that doesn't have Jesus Christ. That's the poorest person in the world. I keep thinking about that, and that's so true, because that's something we need. And that, Solomon asked for that. Give me wisdom to just judge your people. And so, we got through all that and the wealth of Solomon, and now we're going to get into, we're beginning to get ready to build this temple. We keep talking about a spectacular temple, and it is going to be spectacular. I'd love to be able to see it. Just the way Solomon built it. But, we're thinking maybe it's some just gigantic, huge building. But, I was reading about the temple that Solomon built today. And, if you compare it to some of the temples that they had built for these pagan gods, it would be like a little pygmy building beside some of those. So, it's not just this huge, gigantic building like some churches we see today. We see churches that are so huge. Some of them hold, Joel Osteen's church out here, they hold, ain't no telling how many, 70 or 80,000 people. It was a basketball stadium. It's what they bought it from the city of Houston, but I don't like too much like watching it. But that's another story. But yeah.
I don't like him either.
And but there's some churches that hold a pile of, it's just a huge building. But the temple, it don't matter how big your building is that you're worshiping God in, God's not contained to that building.
And he's all the time begging for money, and that church is always full. Looks to me like they'd have enough money from the people that's in there.
He's making millions.
Beg for money.
Okay, we're going to get into chapter 2 of 2 Chronicles, beginning in verse 1. And Solomon determined to build an house for the name of the Lord, and a house for his kingdom. So, here we're going to have two construction sites going on. We're going to have the temple being built, and Solomon a house for his kingdom. Now, he can't use his dad's palace, you know, that was King David, so he's got to have his own built. So, you know, and a lot of these palaces now were huge. They weren't like a little 3-bedroom house or something. I mean, these things were huge. So, and Solomon told out, or he counted out, 70,000 men to bear burdens, and 80,000 to hew to the mountain, which is to cut timber, and 3,600 to oversee them. So, you know, it's going to take a lot of people. All this stuff having to be done by hand, it's going to take a lot of people to be able to get everything going and have the materials coming in enough that they can keep building without having to stop building and waiting. So, and it, you know, that's not only is he going to use these people, but we're going to see he's going to try to get help just like his dad did, just like King David did. And in verse 3, and Solomon said to Huram, the king of Tyre, saying, as thou didst deal with David my father, and didst send him cedars to build him an house to dwell therein, even so deal with me. So David knew, or Solomon knew, that Huram was a good friend of his father's. Now, just because he's a good friend of your pa, don't mean he's going to be a good friend with you. Now, he wanted to be, but David, or I keep saying David, but Solomon is, you know, he's going to kind of welch on some of the stuff that he tells this man that he'll do. And we'll see as we go further that, you know, there's problems with that. But, you know, David sends to him for help because that's what his daddy had done. Solomon, I don't know who else said. Solomon sent to Huram for help, just like his daddy David had done. And, you know, he said, you helped him by sending cedars, help me. And he says, behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual morning and evening.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Behold, I build a house to the name of the Lord my God, to dedicate it to him, and to burn before him sweet incense, and for the continual showbread, and for the burnt offerings morning and evening, on the Sabbaths and on the new moons, and on the solemn feast of the Lord our God. This is an ordinance forever to Israel. So, you know, he's wanting to build this house to God because there's no other God like him. And, you know, is for exactly what God had shared with them that the tabernacle would be for. When they were traveling around in the wilderness, and Moses, God shared with him to build the tabernacle, it was for these same reasons. To offer offerings, all the different offerings, and the showbread, and all the stuff that would be going on. The same things were going to be going on in this temple as had gone on in the tabernacle. So, and the house which I build is great, for great is our God above all gods. You know, Solomon is, you know, right now he's trusting God, and he knew that God had chosen him. And he knew that, you know, this was, you know, what God wanted. And this is what his dad David had told him. You know, you've been chosen to be king, and you're going to build the temple. And, you know, David shared with him, you got to build it to the specifications that God has laid out. And that's it. So, and even though, like I shared, it was, you know, it's not a real huge building, but this thing had to weigh an awful lot with all the gold and silver and brass and stuff that was in it. Lord have mercy. But no telling what this building would have been worth. You know, I think even this building here, our insurance values this building at it's $700,000 or $800,000. So I mean, I'm like, goodness gracious, that's a lot of money. Yeah, but I wouldn't want to sell it for that.
You couldn't replace it for that.
No. So, you know, and I was like, Lord, you know, God blessed us. You know, we built it for a whole heap less than that. But it's still, to me, it's a beautiful building. I mean, the outside's metal, but the inside's what we wanted it to be. So, and I thank God for that. So, but Solomon went on. He says, but who is able to build him an house, seeing the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain him? Who am I then that I should build him an house, save only to burn sacrifice before him? But, you know, God's, like I shared earlier, God is not contained in a building. Just because they were going to build this temple to God, and, you know, Solomon says, you know, who's able to build him a house? Seeing the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain him. You know, why am I going to build this temple? It's not going to be big enough to contain God. But God wasn't going to, he wasn't going to move in that temple. God's everywhere. When they came to that temple to do their service to God and worship Him, now, yeah, God would meet him there, same way here. When we come here on Sunday morning, if we come here and on Wednesday night and Sunday night, whenever we have services, if we'll come here ready to learn and ready to worship, you know what? He'll meet us here. If we'll keep Him first in everything we do, He'll be here with us. But this building does not contain Him. The building that actually contains Him is this. He lives inside of every one of us. So it's just like I shared a long time ago, and I've shared it here a few times. You know, preacher got up and said, I hope the Holy Spirit comes and be's here with us tonight in this service. They were having a revival. This little old lady stood up in the back and said, He's already here. I brought Him with me. You know, and that's so true. We don't have to worry about if He's going to meet us here. We're bringing Him with us. He lives inside of us as a born-again Christian. But, you know, Solomon says, you know, who could build God a house? What size of house would it take to contain God? Well, there's not one big enough, because He's not going to stay in a house. He's got a home. He's got a place that we're going to go be with Him one day. Heaven. And then the whole universe, everywhere, God can be. You know, we serve an awesome God. But he goes on in verse 7. Send me now then, therefore, a man, cunning to work in gold, and in silver, and in brass, and in iron, and in purple, and crimson, and blue, and that can skill to grave with the cunning men that are with me in Judah and in Jerusalem, whom David my father did provide. You know, he's wanting somebody that knows how to work with every part of the temple, to mold things and to engrave things and to make all the parts of the temple. Because, you know, way back we read about how the temple was going to be built. And, you know, everything, just the doors even going into this place was going to be laid with gold. You know, and angels carved in it and all that. You know, they had to have somebody know how to do that. And why? Why would Israel have to have somebody else that would know how to do that? Because most of Israel were farmers at this time. They worked in vineyards and all this kind of stuff instead of woodworking and you know, yeah, they had carpenters and stuff, but But that's different than doing carvings and molding and all this kind of stuff with gold and silver and all this stuff. So Solomon asked Huram, send me somebody that could help me. You sent somebody to help my father in building his house. I need somebody to help build this temple and then build my house too. And then he asked him, he says, send me also cedar trees, fir trees, and algum trees out of Lebanon, for I know that thy servants can skill to cut timber in Lebanon. Behold, my servant shall be with thy servants. In other words, my servants will work right alongside of your folks. Y'all can teach them how to cut lumber and whatever they need to know. So, he wanted somebody that could help them and help teach them some of these things. And, he wanted this wood from Lebanon. At this time, the cedar trees and trees like that were the best from Lebanon. So, he says, even to prepare me timber in abundance, for the house which I am about to build shall be wonderful, great. Back when David was describing it, and I cannot, magnifica or something like that was the word that he used, something similar to that. And, this is going to be a spectacular temple. It would be awesome. I've thought about it numerous times. It would be awesome just God to just show us in our mind a picture of this place. Just let us see a slide show right quick of the outside, the inside, the whole 9 yards. Boy, I'd love to see that. It would be awesome. And Solomon is doing his best at this point. I want to do a good job. I want to do what is best, that we will have an awesome temple, and God will be pleased with it. So, and he says, and behold, I will give to thy servants the hewers that cut timber. So this is what he's offering them. 20,000 measures of beaten barley or crushed barley, and 20,000 measures, beaten wheat, which is crushed wheat, 20,000 measures of barley, 20,000 baths of wine, and 20,000 baths of oil. So, this is a bunch of food products that they would need, that they could use in Tyre. This would feed a lot of folks for quite some time. So, then Huram, the king of Tyre, answered in writing, which he sent to Solomon, because the Lord had loved his people. He hath made thee king over them. So, whoever a king is, whoever a president is, whoever's in power, it's the same way here, right here in the state of Georgia. Whoever God wants to be in the governor's position, that's who will be there. God places people in these positions that's going to really, they may be evil, they may be wicked. We've had wicked presidents. We've had some that's been pretty terrible and bad and all kind of stuff. And but God placed them there for a purpose. Even through the junk that they did, ultimately, they were working God's will. Whether they knew it or not, whether they would ever agree to that. I believe President Obama was a Muslim. I still believe that. And even through the things that he did, he wouldn't agree with you he was doing God's will, but I'm telling you, he was doing, even though a lot of things he did was not quite right. I didn't agree with a lot of stuff he did. It was contrary to this. but ultimately it was working out God's will. And this man, he answered Solomon in writing, and he says, because the Lord hath loved his people, he hath made thee king over them. Huram said, moreover, blessed be the Lord God of Israel that made heaven and earth, who hath given to David the king a wise son, endued with prudence and understanding, that might build an house for the Lord and an house for his kingdom. So, this man, he knew about God. And he was praising God, the Creator. And he was praising God for David, and that God had raised up one of David's sons that would have really such wisdom and understanding to be able to do what God desired. And it seems like with all that Solomon knew, that he would do his best all his life to do God's will. But we'll see as we go on if he does. And he says in verse 13, and now I have sent a cunning man endued with understanding of Huram my father's. So, he's sending him a man that's skillful in all these things. He's sending the people that they need to be able to teach them and to help them to build this temple and Solomon a house for his kingdom. The son of a woman of the daughters of Dan. And now, Dan, that was a tribe of Israel. So this man, he's an Israelite, and he knows how to do these things. He knows how to work with metals and to mold and to craft different items. So, and that's who Huram chose out to go. He says, the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre. So, he was a mixed person. He was a half-breed, or whatever you want to call it. He was half and half. He said he was skillful to work in gold and in silver, in brass, in iron, in stone, in timber, in purple, in blue, and in fine linen, and in crimson. Also to grave any manner of graving, which is to engrave, or he says, and to find out every device which shall be put to him with thy cunning men, and with the cunning men of my Lord David thy father. So, he's agreeing to send folks to do all these things that they need. And he says, this man, he's one of the best. And look at all this man knows how to do. He knows he's skillful in gold, silver, brass, iron, stone, timber, purple, blue, fine linen, crimson, and also how to engrave things. How amazing. But without God, this man could have done none of it. And even in the past when they had to engrave and do all these things, and God raised up a person that was able to do it. God gave them knowledge to figure out how to do these things. So, it's all from God. So, and then he goes on, he says, now therefore the wheat and the barley, the oil and the wine which my Lord hath spoken of, let him send it unto his servants. So now there's going to be a problem with that right there. And we'll see that as we go on. But right now, Huram says, whatever you say, that's fine. Send it to the servants. Send it to the ones that are doing the work. So, and we will cut wood out of Lebanon as much as thou shalt need, and we will bring it to thee in floats by sea to Joppa, and thou shalt carry it up to Jerusalem. So, they were going to kind of do like lumberjacks, you know, you've seen in the past, where they'd be putting a lot of lumber, a lot of logs and stuff in rivers and stuff and floating, and these men would be walking all them logs and guiding it down the river and stuff. They were going to do this. They were going to put it in the sea on floats and get it to Joppa from Lebanon. Could you imagine all those sea, you know, that's rougher than a river. But, you know, they were able to ride these things out and bring it to them. They could pick it up at Joppa, and then they had the task of getting it to Jerusalem. So, you know, Solomon, he knew, you know, we're going to have a lot of folks. A lot of folks doing the work, and a lot of folks that's going to be, you know, they're going to be working too, but they're going to be hauling all this lumber from the seashore at Joppa to Jerusalem. So he does something that David had done in the past in using strangers in the country. So, and you know, God had told him that the strangers in the country, if they wanted to remain in the country of Israel, they needed to follow the ways of Israel. You know, and I hate to get on this, but I'm going to say what God places on the heart. So I don't hate to get into it. I'm sorry I said this. But that's why people even coming into our country today, we don't need to mold ourselves to what they're coming from. They're supposed to mold themselves to what America is. But, you know, it seems we're trying to change all that, and it shouldn't be. But just take that for what it's worth. That was free there. I'll give that comment free. So, but, you know, it's just sad, though. I mean, but here in verse 17, and Solomon numbered all the strangers that were in the land of Israel, after the numbering wherewith David his father had numbered them, and they were found 150,000 and 3,600. So 153,600. That's a lot of folks, strangers in the land at this time. But he's going to use every one of them that's able to be used, and which all these would be able to be used, because these are just the men that are of age to be used. Strangers that were in the land of Israel. You know, they had to see something different about these people. So, you know, and God told them that if these people wanted to live as Jews, they needed to go through the same ceremonies, everything that the Jews went through, and, you know, they would be accepted. So, you know, Solomon counts them, numbers them, just like David his father had done. And he set 70,010 of them to be bearers of burdens. In other words, you know, they were going to be working hard. They were going to be the one doing the hard labor. But, you know, to be in that country, you needed to help with whatever needed to be done. They were sending folks everywhere, learning how to do stuff, learning how to cut timber, learning how, you know, it was just, even with the building of, if you remember when they were building David's palace, he sent men to Lebanon to help them with cutting of the wood. And they would go like, I think it was either 10,000 a month or 30,000 men a month that went, and they only had to go every 3 months. They'd go spend a month, and they'd come home for 2 months. Then they'd go back for a month, come home for 2 months until it was all done. So, you know, Solomon, he had folks going everywhere. So the strangers in the land, they couldn't just sit there. They had to help out. So he had 70,000 of them to be bearers of burdens, and 80,000 to be hewers in the mountain, in other words, to be cutters of the wood, and 3,600 overseers to set the people at work. So you know, with these strangers in the land, Solomon probably knew with the wisdom that he had, you know, it'd probably be better to put some of their own people over them rather than putting some of the Jewish folks over them. You know, so they set some of their own people over them to oversee what they're doing, hauling all this wood from the seashore to Jerusalem. That had to be one huge task. You know, they didn't have no semi-trucks or trains, or they had oxens and carts, and, you know, that's about it.
I was just thinking about the float with the logs down in the sea,
Yeah.
and it being salty. I wonder if it floated any easier there, because I know as a body, your buoyancy's better
Yeah.
versus a river. I mean,
It
I'm
might-
sure the
it-
logs are still heavy, I'm just saying,
It-
it's gonna
it-
be wet, heavy, and trying to get them out.
It might have been easier, I'm not sure, as far as floating them down through there because of the salt content. Because I know, just like in the Dead Sea, it's so salty that it don't matter if you can swim or not, you can just lay back in the water and you won't sink. The salt content in that lake is so high, nothing lives in that lake. And every day, huge piles of salt washes up on the seashore. But it still stays, it's the most salty water in the world. You know, God's amazing in everything that he's done. You know, it amazes me. A lot of the water that is evaporated up to the sky comes from the oceans, salt water. But when it rains down, it's fresh water. You know, how amazing. God's amazing.
Just think about how many pounds of water's up there too, and it's not falling.
Floating around in them clouds. You know,
I think water's, say 8 or 9 pounds to the gallon.
it weighs a
You figure
bun.
that up by,
There's the math guy.
blow your mind.
Ooh, Lordy mercy. Them clouds, they look, I love looking at clouds, but just think about, you know, how heavy they would be. But yet, they can hold that water. They look all fluffy and nice and everything, and they can hold that water in that cloud that an airplane can fly through that cloud. You know, it's amazing to me, all that God can do. We serve an awesome God, the only God. But, you know, Solomon is prepared. But now, he's ready to get started. And he's doing everything he can to get it all lined up, you know, with what his father had done before he died let's get started building. So, anybody have anything on any of these verses?